Oh, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to this month's Tech Talk. Good morning, David. How are you today?
Good morning, Carsten. I'm doing fine. Thank
Very
you.
happy to have you here, and also you, of course. So today we will talk about NAT and forwarding, port forwarding as such. I hope you can hear us very well, and I think it looks very good. So
yes,
David, you have brought us a presentation. We will have some demos, which is perfect.
Yes.
So if you describe in a few sentences, why do we need NAT forwarding at all? Where do I use it?
Yes, NAT forwarding. We mainly need that in case that we want to make a device on the LAN accessible to clients or customers on the WAN side. Which basically means, for example, I'm hosting a Microsoft Exchange on my local site or a local web server or something like that. And I want my customers to be able to access it. So that's when I need NAT forwarding and port forwarding.
Or a very easy example nowadays that I'm sitting in my home office, I need to have access to the server in the company.
Exactly.
And that is one possibility.
Exactly. For example, for some reason, you cannot have a VPN connection, for example.
Yes.
But you need to access it. Then yes, you could do a port forwarding with a NAT to that server for your IP address, obviously. But
perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's why we do need NAT forwarding. That's why we do talk about it today. Yes. Before we start, I would like to highlight again the services, value-added services we have. 1 second. Somehow our slide is not moving. So we are now it's moving. Perfect. So value-added services. And the next slide. So we just want to give you the possibility, if you have any questions, that you can also buy services from us, and we do a configuration together and teach you how to do it when you want to do it next time. Just be aware, yes. This service will not be there forever. If you want to still buy it, you can do it, but it will vanish probably end of this month. But nevertheless, you have access to our support portal, finding at support.zyxel.eu. There you will have, with your My Zyxel account, access to all the platforms we are running. So the partner portal, the support portal, and also the Campus Academy. So please be invited to do so. And we also have LinkedIn and YouTube where you can follow us. YouTube, very important. We're always pushing new videos like unboxing, basic configuration, and the like, as well as this Tech Talk to YouTube. Yes. And you can always find the latest videos there.
Yes.
Good. Before we start now with forwarding, if you have any questions, please use the question field in your environment. There you can raise some questions. So far, we have got a few comments that everything is fine and great. Yes. So I think we can start, David, looking into the forwarding.
Yes, just one thing. There's one question. If this is the German Tech Talk, it is not, sadly. The German Tech Talk we already had. This will be on YouTube very shortly.
During the afternoon, yeah. Yes. After lunch, you will find it on YouTube. You go there and then you will have the German Tech Talk. So the same content, but in a different language.
Exactly.
David and I rebooted ourselves and now we are talking English. Yes. So let's jump into the topic. I'm very grateful that we can have this discussion about forwarding, because I know that a lot of customers are struggling to find the difference between firewall routing and port forwarding. So let's jump into this.
Yes.
The agenda for today?
Exactly. The agenda for today will be NAT modes. So where we'll basically talk about the 3 modes of NAT that you can use, the 3 options that you have. We will talk about the default options that are there if you activate it and what you need to set up to get it working. We will talk a little bit about the basics of port forwarding. We will take a look at the NAT loopback as well as the firewall configuration. After that, we will go a little bit into the topic of debugging and how to actually check if things are working, and a little bit on the side of like, okay, nice to know stuff. For example, what do you need to do if you want to achieve outcome X, for example.
Of course. So, and we can always invite you to have questions, and I can also say that we have a live demo. So behind us here,
yes,
we have the ATP 200 access point switch and everything. So we will use that and also show you the configuration live on the devices.
Exactly.
Good. Then let's go from there.
Yes. So let's start with the NAT modes. Currently in our devices, we have 3 main NAT modes, which will be the virtual server. You can think of it as, for example, your standard port forwarding on a regular modem or router, which is basically used in, as the slide states, like 98, in my opinion, more not towards the 99% of cases. After that, we have the one-to-one NAT, which means that basically if you have multiple public IP addresses on your WAN interface, you can route one of those, or not route, but you can pass through one of those public IP addresses from the WAN to one of your local devices. For example, if you have a standalone server in a DMZ or something like that, and you want to have it its own IP address in the public network, you can then basically pass one of your public addresses to said server. The many one-to-one NAT is basically the same, but it works on a batch of IP addresses.
Broader scale of IP addresses.
Exactly.
You can configure
so
accordingly.
You could basically use a cluster of web servers, for example, like let's say you have 10 servers and you want each of them to have a public IP address. You could use the standard one-to-one NAT, but that would require you to create 10 rules. With a many one-to-one NAT, you can do all of that with one rule. So you have one rule for all 10 public IPs towards all 10 servers.
Having said that, on the top right, you see configuration. Then you go to a network, a NAT. There you can find the details, which we will show you also later.
Yes.
Also mentioned there is a knowledge bank article talking about NAT in general and what you need to do.
Exactly.
So let's jump into our default options.
Yes.
And what needs to be considered when configuring a NAT rule.
Exactly. So if we go into the configuration menu or the configuration screen and we click on Add NAT Rule, what we're presented with is this default option window. So there are a few things that we need to consider. Mainly, give it a name, obviously, so that we know what it is. And then we go further towards our 3 main modes, where we can choose between the virtual server, the one-to-one, and the many-to-one NAT. For this topic here, and also for the live demo, I chose the virtual server. And in that case, we just choose the incoming WAN interface or the incoming public interface. In this case, it's WAN 1. If you have multiple interfaces, you'll have to create one NAT rule for each. But the device, if you have, for example, configured a failover for the WAN, is intelligent enough to choose the correct NAT rule for the current status of the WAN. As source IP, you can keep any, or for example, if you want to limit the access to the NAT rule to one single public IP address, you could, for example, then enter the IP address of the web client that should be able to access the server. You can do that as well with the firewall, which we will take a look at later down the road, where you can set it up even more granular and also for groups of addresses. As external IP, we would usually put the IP address of the WAN interface that we're using. So in this case, the WAN 1 IP. Why? That's important for the NAT loopback, which is by default enabled, which we will take also a look later on. The internal IP, I think that's self-explanatory. That's the device that we want to make reachable in the WAN or on the WAN side. And the port mapping type we can put to port or service, which means that you can put in manually ports that you want to give the WAN devices access to, or you could use a predefined set of services that are already configured on the device as well.
Perfect. So, and then we also have the ports, the external port and the internal port.
Exactly.
Maybe you can give us an example on the HTTPS.
Yes. So for example, let me jump one forward here, where I already did the configuration, in this case for a switch. The external service or the external port is basically the port that I am communicating with on the outside. So in this example, we took the 8443 for HTTPS because our firewall already uses the standard HTTPS port for its own web interface.
Correct.
And the internal service is basically the port that my traffic gets translated to.
So it's from 8443
to 443 for the switch.
From external to internal. Then
exactly.
In the traffic is in the firewall.
Okay. Yes.
Good. There is a question I think we should maybe look at quickly.
Hi, is it better to use source IP here or in the security policy? That's a very good question that we also already had in the German Tech Talk. I think it comes down to sort of configuration preference. If, for example, from my point of view, is if I have one singular public IP that needs to be accessing that specific port on that specific device, I rather put it in directly here, because then I don't have to worry about anything else in the firewall rules except for opening the ports and be done with it. If I have a group of public IPs, then I would rather use the security policy, because there I have more ways of defining specific factors, because we obviously don't want it to open it to the whole wide world, but rather to that set specific batch of public IPs.
For example, for only let's say German IP addresses.
For example. Or for example, if I have let's say there is a service that I am hosting on the Amazon Web Services, for example. How that usually works is you get dynamically assigned a lot of IP addresses there, and if those services needs to communicate with the device on my LAN side, what I would do is basically put in an FQDN that binds to those dynamically assigned IPs, and then I could put in the FQDN in the firewall rule. So it then automatically only accepts IP addresses that are being resolved via that FQDN, for example. And that's something that you cannot do in the NAT rule.
Perfect. So then we also answer that question. Can you explain this NAT loopback a bit more in detail?
Yes, of course. So basically the NAT loopback, what that does is it enables us to access the share or the port forwarding that's usually only working from an external side, also from within the LAN. So what I could do is, instead of typing the IP address or the local IP address of the web server, for example, when in this case, I could basically just type in its FQDN. So for example, www.example.com, and the gateway, so our firewall in that case, the ATP, will then see that, translate it to its own public IP address, and simulate the traffic to be external. So the web server doesn't see my request coming from my local LAN IP, but from the outside.
Correct. So that's a service already enabled when
exactly.
I look on the interface. I think let's jump into a live demo. Let's jump and look into this directly. So I think this is very well explained so far, and it's very interesting to see, of course, where it's configured on the live AGP.
Exactly. So then, as you already said, let's go ahead and check the live demo. So in this case, we're on our device, and I already did all the configuration so that we can really have a look at it in its full glory. So as you can see, as per default with our devices, if you go into the configuration, you're already starting out in the network segment under the interface.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that we need to do is go down here, 3 steps, and click on NAT. And now you see we have our rule here. So I already named it switch port forwarding. The mapping type, we chose virtual server because that's the one that's applicable here. And as interface, I chose the WAN 1. If you remember, or if you were very perceptive, you saw that we have 2 WAN interfaces connected. So if I wanted to make that port forwarding also accessible from WAN 2, I would need to create a second rule, as I mentioned earlier. But
and there you have the priorities. Yeah? So
exactly, we have the priority
takes,
here.
Yes.
The first takes obviously the first.
Yeah.
And in this case, we have it in the WAN trunk in failover mode. So what that means is the same as with policy routing. It basically would go ahead and check, okay, my WAN 1 is active, my WAN 2 is in standby, so I disable everything that's related to WAN 2. In this case, the NAT rule, the policy routing, and stuff. If now WAN 1 fails and WAN 2 takes over, it will switch on everything related to WAN 2 and switch off everything related to WAN 1.
Automatically.
Automatically.
Nothing needs to be
exactly.
done, so that's very good.
So going further here, we have our incoming interface, which is the WAN 1. Source IP we left on any, obviously, because we want everyone to have access to it for this example's sake. And then we have the external IP, which is important for our NAT loopback. If you don't have that, or for example, if you don't have a static IP, but a dynamic IP address that you get assigned periodically from your provider, and you don't have, for example, a dynamic DNS or an FQDN or something like that, you leave that to any, but then you have to disable the NAT loopback. Otherwise, the device will have issues with routing later. And then obviously we have the switch as the internal IP. We put the protocol to TCP because we're using HTTPS, so there's no need to use anything else. And then, as we mentioned earlier here, we have the external port for HTTPS, which is the 8443, which we then translate into the internal port for the switch of 443.
If I want to modify the rule, how do I do this?
You can select it and you just click on edit, or you just do, which is probably very simple, just a double click.
As usual.
Exactly, as usual, a double click. And here we see what we already saw in the slides. Basically, my rule here, it's enabled, it's named, it's a virtual server. So basically what we just ran through, and we have the NAT loopback down here. Something very important, which we will take a look on later, as well as already mentioned, is a security policy, which is needed for that rule to work. Because right as of now, yes, we are translating the traffic. So basically we have poked a little hole in our firewall, so to speak, but we need the to tell the firewall, hey, that traffic, please let it through.
Exactly. That we will do in the next step.
Exactly.
And you can here also see the configuration from 8443 to 443, so that was also visible. Perfect.
Exactly. So coming to what we just said, the firewall routing, firewall rule adding, which is, in my opinion, the most important step in all of that, because if we don't have that,
traffic will come in, but
traffic will come in, but will automatically land on the default rule, which is by default block.
Exactly. So, and you see on the top right again, you find it in security policy, policy control, and there you go.
And there you go. One important thing here is please make sure it's WAN to LAN and not WAN to device, because we are allowing traffic from the WAN to a switch, which is in the LAN. Because at this stage, we already passed the device, which is in this case the Zywall or the ATP for that matter. Which is also very important that we put in here the HTTPS normal service. So basically the normal HTTPS port, which is the 443, because we are already translated. We passed that stage. Yes, and in that case, we just say from WAN to LAN 1, put in our destination, which is the switch, tell it, okay, the traffic is HTTPS traffic, and put the action to allow. What you can see here on the slide as well is we put it to log alert. That's coming down as well later, but in general, we just need that for debugging purposes in this case, because we want to obviously to test if our little rule is working.
It gives us great transparency, I would say, especially at the beginning when I've just configured it. I can see if it works or not.
Exactly, yes, but we will come to that as well in the debugging part.
Exactly. So let's look onto the firewall again and see how that really works in the configuration point of view. So we are switching here to the firewall interface.
All right, now, as you can see, we are still in our NAT portion here. So if we want now to make it actually work, is we just go down to security policy, policy control. And as you can see here, we have on priority 2 our rule here, which let me quickly make it a little bit bigger. So naming is obviously WAN to switch from WAN. So in this case, we're talking now zones, not interfaces. To the LAN 1 zone, our destination is the switch, our service is HTTPS, and then we put it here to allow and log alert. For the ones of you who are not quite sure now, okay, interface that I get, but what is a zone? A zone is basically an object that groups together different interfaces. In this case, we have the WAN zone, which spans our WAN 1, WAN 2, and the respective PPPoE interfaces. So that said, if you have a WAN failover like we have here, and you would configure 2 NAT rules, you still just need 1 firewall rule, because we're talking zones and not interfaces here. So you can do your failover with 1 single firewall policy. And the LAN here is our LAN 1 interface. There's as well a little VLAN in there. And then we have the switch with its local IP, and we have the service here.
Great. So yeah, so you have a few debugging hints now, and I do know that you want to look into the log as well to see what does it mean, log alert. So we are happy to show you that. Let's look into the site immediately, I think, into debugging hints and
exactly
what's important.
So as I already mentioned, we set the firewall rule to log alert in the first case because it will help us with a little bit more easy debugging, because what that means is that the traffic that is handled by that specific rule will be marked as red in the log window. We can take a look on that in a second live demo when we go into, okay, let's see how it looks in the real world. Another thing that a lot of people, I wouldn't say are getting wrong, but maybe not understand correctly, is if you're using PPPoE on the device. So basically you have a modem in bridge mode in front, and your firewall is doing all the logging in and stuff like that towards your provider. is do not select the WAN 1 interface, but you would select the WAN 1 underscore PPP interface, because that is the actual interface that's being used for all the traffic.
Perfect. Perfect hint.
And as already mentioned, is always allow the destination port in the firewall, because at this point we passed the NAT. So our traffic, so if we would look at the packet that we are sending and the device is receiving in the header, the destination port is no longer 8443, it is 443, because we are through the NATing process.
We're already in the firewall and go from there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that might be very important here is, let's say, for example, we have an IP camera that we want to make available publicly, or at least for a very specific set of people in this case. And I can reach it in the LAN, but I cannot reach it in the WAN. So what I do first, or always do first, is I check the gateway of the camera. So, for example, if the gateway IP address for the camera is set to, for example, our switch here, it's obviously that the WAN traffic will not work, because the switch does not know, okay, what do I need to do with that traffic, and it will discard it. So make sure that the gateway is always set to the interface IP address of the firewall. So for example, if our firewall is the 192.168.1.1, make sure that the gateway address on the IP camera is set to that IP address.
Yeah.
And for example, if you have servers in high availability, you can use the virtual load balancer. So what that means is you can make all of those HA servers available with one single NAT rule, which is also very important in that case.
I think so too. So very easy to handle then. Let's look into the log file a bit and see how we can verify really the debugging as such, and make sure that everything works fine, and how we can disable it afterwards again.
Of course. So if we go here, you already see, as mentioned before, we have it set to log alert. So what that means is, if we go here to the monitoring page and go down to the log, you are greeted with your standard log window or monitor. So what we want to do now is basically check, hey, is our forwarding working? So how do we do that? That's pretty simple. We go to the address of the switch. In this case, we just reload it. And we're already seeing, okay, we're greeted with our login page. So we are sure that the rule is working. But to double confirm that it's actually using the firewall rule that we set, is we go down to the log, we just say refresh, and now we see here our log entries. So this is us, this is our client, this is our source port, and here's the destination port on the switch. And we already see it's saying access forward. So what we also see here is priority 2. What that means is that basically already tells us which rule it uses. So if we go back to policy control, we see here priority. Let me make that a little bit bigger. And we have number 2, and we see that's our WAN to switch. So what we said earlier.
Perfect. Why is it red, David?
It is red because we set it to log alert.
Yeah.
So if we take a look here, we have 3 options. No means no logging at all for that rule, which is the one that we're choosing now to deactivate it. We have log, which means it's just generating a log entry, but it's black on black, like everything else in the log, which makes stuff very hard to find if we are looking for something very specific. But in this case, if we're going to debug something, we put it to log alert. And please make sure that also the firewall rule that you want to debug is the only one that's set to log alert, because otherwise you have a completely red log window and you have the same.
To find again.
Exactly. Yeah. It's difficult again.
So to disable it, we put it to no, and then it's vanished from the log file and
exactly
not be recorded anymore.
And obviously to disable the rule itself, as with everything else on our firewalls, you just click on it, choose it, and you click on inactivate and click on apply, and the rule is basically disabled.
Very important, this apply, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's not only that. Right. Thanks, David. I think that is a very good insight. We didn't get any further questions. If you have any questions, please, we still have a few minutes that you can bring questions to us.
Yes.
And there we have a question.
Yes. Not about NAT. Is there a config file for site-to-site VPN for ATP 100-200 to Microsoft Azure? Not a config file as such, but if we go to support.zyxel.eu, very important address, there is a knowledge base article that describes how to set up policy-based VPN / routing towards Microsoft Azure. And that's also something, if we're in that topic, we do not officially support BGP or routing-based VPN towards Azure. It's policy-based. That's very important in that topic too. But again, support.zyxel.eu, I think that's the main address for everyone who needs help or wants to know something, because there should be everything in there.
Correct, and just look for Azure, and there you'll find the article, I think, quite straightforward. Right, so one of the questions we received earlier was also if Zyxel does support 10 gig firewall hardware.
Yes.
And David, I know that you know a bit more than everybody else, so please,
yes.
Maybe you can share
that. Yes, I cannot share too much, but I can say that we have something in the works, which we are very excited about. We currently have something in the pipeline that we are currently testing as well, and yeah, I'm already very eager to tell you what it is, how it is, when it will come. But as of now, the answer is simply yes. We are working on it, and look out for it, because there will be something very soon.
And talking about look out for it, you are always up to date. If you go to support.zyxel.eu, there
yes.
you find the latest articles, you find security advisories and the like.
Exactly.
If you have any questions related to this tech talk, or if you want to suggest a topic, then please use academy@zyxel.eu. You're always invited to do so, and we're happy to facilitate questions that you might have had.
Yes, and there is one. Is it better to use source IP in the NAT rule or in the security policy? Well, like I said, it's kind of a preference of the person who configures it. You can take it as a question of religion, if you want to say so. So basically, like I already mentioned, the way I handle it is, if I know that there is only one single IP address that needs to access that port forwarding,
and it's quickly done.
It's quickly done in the NAT rule, and then you just put in any on the source for the firewall rule itself. But as soon as it grows over that one single IP address, or even if it's an FQDN, I switch over to the security policy, because I have way more options there.
Because of grouping. And
exactly, yes. Because I can group it, I can actually put in a FQDN. And well, I mean, that's why the firewall rules are there, to make configuration very easy when it comes to having a lot of stuff that we need to take care of security-wise.
Perfect. Well explained, David. Thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you. No problem.
It was a pleasure to have you here. So if you have any feedback, as mentioned, please share that with us. And I think we are through, David. We have gone around the world. Everybody
yes.
has asked a question. Thank you very much. And let's close
no
here.
problem.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you next time.
We're Zyxel, and we're your networking ally.